What if the life you're living right now is the exact prison you built to avoid becoming who you're supposed to be? What if your comfort is the most dangerous thing about you? And what if, deep down, you already know this is true? You feel it when the noise fades. You feel it when you're alone. You feel it when distraction stops working. There's a version of you that watches everything you do, so subscribe if you recognize that version of yourself. Not for content, but as a declaration. Comment, "I see it," if something just clicked, and it's not impressed. Not by your excuses, not by your delays, not by the way you pretend you're figuring things out. You're not figuring anything out. You're avoiding. You're hiding behind potential. You're addicted to the idea of becoming, but terrified of actually becoming. Because becoming requires loss. Loss of comfort, loss of validation, loss of who you've been pretending to be, and you don't want to lose that. So you stay stuck, half aware, half alive, half dangerous. You tell yourself you need more time, more knowledge, more motivation. But that's a lie you've rehearsed so many times it feels like truth. You don't need more. You need less. Less distraction, less noise, less dependence on approval. Because right now, you're not weak because you lack strength. You're weak because you refuse to use it. That's harder to admit. That cuts deeper. Because it means everything you hate about your life is something you're allowing. You wake up tired, not from effort, but from avoidance. You scroll instead of building. You think instead of acting. You talk instead of executing. And then you wonder why nothing changes. But you already know why. You're just hoping it will fix itself. It won't. Life doesn't reward intention. It responds to action. Cold, indifferent, unforgiving, just like reality itself. And reality doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care how hard your past was. It doesn't care how unfair things seem. It only respects one thing: control. Control over your mind. Control over your reactions. Control over your habits. That's where power begins. Not in noise. Not in attention. Not in being seen. But in silence. Because silence forces you to face yourself. And that's what you've been avoiding. You surround yourself with noise so you don't hear your own thoughts. You chase validation so you don't question your own worth. You stay busy so you don't realize you're going nowhere. But when everything stops, there it is. The truth. Unfiltered. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. You're not where you should be. And it's not because you couldn't. It's because you didn't. That realization, that's the beginning of transformation. But most people run from it. They distract. They justify. They blame. They soften the truth until it no longer demands change. But you're still here, reading this, feeling this. So something in you isn't dead yet. Something in you is still resisting the lie. Good, because that's where this starts. Not with motivation, but with confrontation. You don't need inspiration. You need honesty, brutal honesty, the kind that strips away every excuse, the kind that leaves you with nothing but responsibility. Because responsibility is power, and you've been avoiding it. You've been waiting for something external to shift your life. A moment, an opportunity, a sign. But there is no sign. There is only decision. And decision doesn't come from comfort. It comes from pressure, from pain, from the realization that if you don't change, nothing will. That's the first shift. You stop waiting. You start choosing. Not when you feel ready, but when you realize readiness is a myth. You act because you must, not because you want to, because wanting is weak. Wanting negotiates. Must doesn't. Must is final. Must is ruthless. Must doesn't care how you feel. And that's what you've been missing. You've been negotiating with your own potential. You say, "I'll start tomorrow. I'll try later. I just need one more push." No, you don't need a push. You need to stop resisting. Because the resistance, that's you. Not your circumstances. Not your past. Not your environment. You. And until you accept that, nothing changes. That's the second shift. You stop blaming. Completely. Even when it's not your fault. You take ownership anyway. Because blame gives you relief. but ownership gives you control. And control is the only thing that matters. Everything else is noise, and you've had enough noise. If you're still here, you're not like most people. You're not here to be entertained. You're here because something in you is tired. Tired of being average. Tired of knowing you could do more. Tired of wasting time pretending it's not killing you slowly. A signal that you're done being passive. Because this path is not for everyone. It requires isolation. Not loneliness. Isolation. There's a difference. Loneliness is weakness. Isolation is choice. Loneliness seeks distraction. Isolation seeks clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because once you see clearly, you can't go back. You can't unsee your habits. You can't ignore your patterns. You can't pretend anymore. And that's where most people quit. Because awareness without action is torture. You see everything, but change nothing. And that gap, it eats you alive. So you have two options. Shrink your awareness, or rise to meet it. Most shrink. Few rise. Decide which one you are. Not with words, with action. Because identity isn't what you say. It's what you repeat. Daily. Relentlessly. Without emotion. That's the third shift. You detach from how you feel. You stop asking, do I feel like it? You start asking, does it need to be done? And if the answer is yes, you do it. No hesitation. No drama. No negotiation. That's discipline. Not intensity. Not bursts of motivation. Consistency under resistance. That's power. And you don't have it yet. Not fully. But you can. If you're willing to suffer correctly. Because suffering isn't the problem. You're already suffering. From procrastination. From regret. From knowing you're capable of more. So the question isn't whether you'll suffer. It's how. Will you suffer from effort? Or from avoidance? One builds. The other destroys. Choose carefully. Because time doesn't pause. It doesn't wait for your transformation. It moves. With or without you. And every day you hesitate, you reinforce the person you don't want to be. That's the fourth shift. You respect time like it's limited. Because it is. Not in theory. In reality, people disappear. Opportunities close. Energy fades. And you're acting like you have forever. You don't. You have now. That's it. And now is uncomfortable. Now requires effort. Now forces you to act. So you escape into later. But later is a lie. It's a delay disguised as hope. And you've believed it for too long. It's time to break that pattern. Right here. Right now. Because awareness is useless if it stays silent. Make it real. Anchor it. Then act on it. Because the next shift is where everything changes. You stop trying to be understood. You stop explaining yourself. You stop seeking approval. Because approval weakens you. It makes you dependent. Turns your actions into performances. And you've been performing your whole life. For friends. For family. For people who don't even think about you. That ends now. You move in silence. You build in private. You let results speak. Not words. That's the fifth shift. Silence becomes your weapon. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're focused. Focused people don't talk. They execute. And execution doesn't need an audience. It needs discipline, patience, relentless consistency. That's how you separate. That's how you become dangerous. Not loud, not emotional, controlled, calculated, unshakable. And that version of you is not far. It's just buried. Under habits, under fear, under years of choosing easy over necessary. But it's still there, waiting, watching. And every time you ignore it, it gets quieter. Not gone, just quieter. Until one day, you don't hear it at all. That's the real danger. Not failure, not struggle, but silence from your own potential. Because when that voice disappears, so does your chance to become more. So don't let it fade. Don't let comfort win. Don't let fear decide. Because at the end of this, there's only one question that matters. Did you become who you could have been? Or did you watch that version of yourself disappear? Answer that honestly, then act accordingly. This is just the beginning. What comes next is where most people stop reading, not because they disagree, but because agreement becomes uncomfortable when it demands change. You didn't come this far to stay emotionally stirred and practically unchanged. So we go deeper, not into motivation, into philosophy that outlives emotion, because everything you've felt so far, even that pressure in your chest, even that uncomfortable recognition, it isn't new. It's ancient. It has been written, lived, and conquered long before you ever felt it. The Stoics already mapped this battlefield, and you're standing in the same place they once stood, just with more distractions. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire, wrote to himself something you need to hear without romanticizing it. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But here's what most people miss. He wasn't talking about calm mornings and peaceful thoughts. He wrote that while surrounded by war, betrayal, death, pressure, and responsibility that would crush most modern minds instantly. So when you say, "I can't focus," or "I don't feel ready," or "my situation is different," you're not describing reality. You're describing resistance dressed as identity. Because Marcus didn't wait for ideal conditions. He acted inside chaos. And so do you, or you collapse under it. There is no third option. That's the first Stoic truth you need to absorb until it stops sounding inspirational and starts becoming uncomfortable. Your life is not happening to you. It is responding to you. Your habits are votes. Your decisions are direction. Your discipline or lack of it is shaping your entire existence in real time. And Epictetus said it even more brutally. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Most people misread that as comfort. It is not comfort. It is responsibility. Because if your reaction is yours, then your suffering is partly yours too. Not all of it, but enough of it that excuses lose their power. And that's what you've been protecting, your excuses. You don't call them that, of course. You call them timing, energy, mood, environment, preparation. But Stoicism strips all of that away and leaves you standing in front of one uncomfortable mirror. You either govern yourself, or you are governed by everything else. And right now, be honest, you are being governed. By impulses, by notifications, by comfort loops disguised as rest, by fear disguised as logic. You are not making decisions. You are reacting to urges and calling it life. And that's why days feel heavy but empty at the same time. Because nothing is being built while everything is being consumed. Seneca warned about this centuries ago. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Read that again, not like literature but like accusation. Because the Stoics didn't write to entertain you. They wrote to confront you. And if you were alive in their time, you would not have escaped their judgment just because you had intentions. Intentions mean nothing in Stoicism without action. Only behavior proves character. So let's remove the illusion completely. You are not stuck. You are practicing a pattern. And patterns can be broken, but only through interruption. Not insight, interruption. That means doing the thing you avoid the moment avoidance appears. Not after you negotiate with yourself. Not after motivation arrives. Not after fear leaves. Because fear doesn't leave. It reduces when ignored through action. That is discipline. And discipline is not intensity. It is interruption of weakness, repeated until weakness loses authority. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people lie to themselves again. You think your problem is that life is hard. No, your problem is that you are inconsistent. Stoics didn't aim for emotional highs. They aimed for stability under pressure. That is why Marcus Aurelius could write in the middle of collapse, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Not because events were easy, but because he refused to let external chaos dictate internal order. And you let a small inconvenience derail an entire day. You let one negative thought become identity. You let temporary discomfort become permanent avoidance. That is not weakness. That is untrained perception. and perception can be trained. But only if you stop defending your current version of yourself. Because here's the hidden truth nobody wants to admit. You are attached to your current limitations. Not because you love them, but because they are familiar. And familiarity feels like safety, even when it is destruction in slow motion. So you return to them, over and over, even when you know better. That is why change feels like suffering. Because change threatens identity, and identity resists death, even when that identity is the reason you feel stuck. Stoicism teaches something radical here. Do not protect your current self. Replace it, deliberately, ruthlessly, consciously, not through emotion but through repetition. You do not find discipline. You construct it through repeated discomfort. And every time you choose avoidance, you are reinforcing a weaker version of yourself. That is not philosophy. That is mechanics. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. Now ask yourself honestly, not emotionally. How many times have you chosen the easier path and called it recovery? How many times have you delayed something important and called it waiting for the right time? How many times have you consumed instead of created and called it rest? Be precise, because the Stoics would not let you escape precision. They would strip away your language until only truth remains. And truth is simple. You are becoming what you repeatedly do, not what you say, not what you wish, not what you believe, what you repeat. So if your repetition is distraction, you will become distraction. If your repetition is avoidance, you will become avoidance. And if your repetition is discipline, you will become something most people never experience. Self-command. That is what Stoics called freedom. Not doing what you want, but wanting what is necessary. Now understand this clearly. Freedom is not expansion of choice. It is reduction of internal chaos. Because a chaotic mind is not free, it is controlled by everything. By emotion, by impulse, by environment, by fear, by approval. And approval is one of the most dangerous chains you wear because it feels like connection. But it is dependence disguised as belonging. Seneca said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." So if your decisions change based on who is watching, you are not free. If your discipline disappears when motivation fades, you are not free. If your identity shifts depending on external validation, you are not free. You are reactive. And reactivity is the opposite of Stoic power. Now here is where transformation actually begins. Not in understanding this, but in implementing it. You do not need a new life. You need a new response. The next time you feel resistance, you act anyway. The next time you feel tired without reason, you move anyway. The next time your mind offers delay, you refuse negotiation. Not loudly, not emotionally, calmly, like a Stoic. Because Stoicism is not aggression. It is control under pressure. It is silence under chaos. It is action without applause. And that is what separates the person you are from the person you could become. Not talent, not intelligence, but response under friction. Now listen carefully again. The life you want is not blocked. It is delayed by repetition of avoidance. That is it. No mystery, no hidden curse. Just repeated choices reinforcing a predictable outcome. But the same mechanism that built your current life can build a new one. If you change the input, that is power. And power is neutral. It does not reward desire. It rewards consistency. So when Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one," he wasn't giving motivation. He was removing escape routes. Because thinking is not transformation. Action is. And if you are still waiting for clarity before you move, you will wait forever. Clarity comes after motion, not before. So you must become someone who acts first and interprets later. Not emotionally reckless, but internally committed. That is Stoic execution. Now the final truth, the one most people avoid because it removes all comfort. No one is coming to rescue your potential. Not motivation, not inspiration, not timing, not circumstances, only you. and you will either respond to that truth with avoidance or with responsibility. But responsibility will feel heavy at first, because it ends the illusion that something outside you controls everything. It doesn't. It never did. And now that you see that, you cannot unsee it. That is the point of Stoic awakening. Not peace, but clarity so sharp it demands change. So here is your real choice. Continue living as a reaction to comfort, or begin living as an expression of discipline. One leads to repetition of the same life. The other leads to a life you cannot yet imagine. But it will cost you comfort, excuses, delay, and the identity that has protected you from discomfort for years. And the question is not whether you can do it. The question is whether you will stop protecting the version of you that cannot. Because the Stoics already answered that question for you. You are not your past. You are your next action. So act like it. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. Because now is the only moment where power exists. Everything else is narrative. And you are done living in narrative. You are here for something harder. Something real. Something earned. This is where philosophy stops being theory and starts becoming your life. Now there is no room left for comfort disguised as reflection. What comes next is execution-level truth. Not ideas. Not inspiration. Not philosophy you admire but never embody. This is where the script stops speaking to your emotions and starts confronting your behavior. Because understanding without action is self-deception in a more intelligent form. And Stoics had no patience for that. Let's continue. You already know the problem now. But knowing has never been the issue. The issue has always been obedience. Obedience to your own standards. Obedience to your own decisions. Obedience to the version of you that appears in your mind at your strongest moments, but disappears when resistance shows up. That gap between what you know and what you do, that is where your life is being decided. Not in motivation, not in awareness, in that gap. And every time you choose comfort inside that gap, you widen it. Every time you hesitate, you reinforce it. Every time you delay, you strengthen the identity that cannot execute. So listen carefully. Your life is not changing because you are repeatedly choosing the same internal outcome, avoidance dressed as logic. And the mind is very skilled at disguising avoidance. It will call it thinking things through. It will call it preparing. It will call it waiting for clarity. But Marcus Aurelius would strip that language down immediately. He would call it what it is, resistance to action. And resistance is always emotional, even when it pretends to be rational. That's the trick. You think you are analyzing your life, but most of the time you are protecting your comfort. And comfort is not neutral. Comfort is regression in disguise. Because every time you choose what is easy over what is necessary, you are training yourself to become weaker under pressure. And life is pressure, not occasionally, constantly. So you are either becoming someone who sharpens under pressure, or someone who collapses under it. There is no static version of you, only direction. Stoicism forces you to accept that truth without emotional cushioning. Seneca didn't write for people who wanted to feel better. He wrote for people willing to become better. And he said something most modern minds would reject instantly if they were honest. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. But the deeper meaning is sharper than comfort allows. Most of your suffering is not from your situation. It is from your interpretation of it. And your interpretation is shaped by habit, not truth. So when you say, I can't, what you often mean is, I haven't trained myself to endure the discomfort required. That is not limitation. That is undeveloped capacity. And undeveloped capacity feels like identity. But it is not identity. It is simply repetition. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. You are not held back by what you lack. You are held back by what you refuse to face. Because facing truth requires dismantling the version of you that avoids it. And that version of you has been running your decisions for years. It is the part that says later. The part that says not today. The part that negotiates with discipline like discipline is optional. But Stoicism removes negotiation entirely. It replaces it with alignment. Either your actions align with your principles, or they don't. There is no emotional loophole, no excuse clause, no temporary exception that doesn't become permanent identity. So ask yourself, what have you been repeatedly excusing that is now shaping your entire direction? Be precise, not vague, not poetic, precise, because vagueness is where self-deception survives. And self-deception is comfortable, but it is also the slowest form of failure. Now understand this clearly. You do not need more information. You are not lacking insight. You are lacking enforcement. You do not enforce your own standards. You negotiate with them, and every negotiation weakens authority. That is why your discipline feels inconsistent. Not because you are incapable, but because you have trained yourself to treat your own decisions as suggestions. And a mind that treats decisions as suggestions will never build a life of stability. It will only build cycles, high intention, low execution, temporary motivation, permanent repetition of old habits. And you already know this pattern. You have lived it. That's why this feels uncomfortable, because it is accurate, and accuracy removes escape. Now let's go deeper into Stoic practice, not theory. Stoicism is not passive acceptance. It is active control over what is within your power. And what is within your power has always been the same three things: your thoughts, your choices, your actions, not outcomes, not people, not timing, not external validation. Only those three. But here is where most people fail. They try to control outcomes instead of controlling behavior. So when outcomes don't respond quickly, they collapse internally. That collapse is what you call lack of motivation. But it is actually attachment to results without willingness to endure process. And Stoics would reject that completely, because process is the only thing you own. So if you are waiting for visible results before you commit fully, you are already losing, because commitment that depends on reward is not commitment. It is transaction. And life does not guarantee fair transactions. It only responds to consistency. Now listen closely. Your future self is not created by hope. It is created by enforcement of discipline in moments you want to avoid it. That is it. Nothing else. Not identity affirmations. Not positive thinking. Not emotional readiness. Just enforcement. And enforcement always feels uncomfortable at first, because you are breaking identity patterns. You are interrupting neural habits. You are forcing structure where chaos has been normal, and chaos resists structure. That resistance is what you feel as difficulty. But difficulty is not a sign to stop. It is a sign you are finally doing something different, and different is the only path to change. So when you feel resistance next time, understand this: that resistance is not a warning. It is a threshold, and most people retreat at thresholds. They interpret discomfort as danger instead of transition. But Stoics train themselves to walk through it, not because they didn't feel it, but because they understood it had no authority. Now let's address something deeper. You are not competing with other people. You are competing with your own repetition. Your past decisions are your only real opposition, and they are invisible. So the fight is internal. Every day, every decision, every moment you choose between discipline and delay always looks harmless, but it compounds, silently, relentlessly, until one day you look back and realize you did not drift accidentally. You drifted through repeated permission. Permission to skip, permission to delay, permission to settle, permission to stay the same while time moved forward. And time does not pause for self-understanding. It only records behavior. So now the Stoic question becomes unavoidable. What are you reinforcing right now? Because you are always reinforcing something. Either discipline or avoidance. Either direction or drift. Either control or reaction. There is no neutral mode. Even inaction is action. Even delay is decision. Even silence is participation in your current trajectory. So if nothing changes, it is not because life refused you. It is because you repeated yourself. and repetition becomes identity faster than intention ever does. Now here is the final Stoic shift in this sequence. You stop identifying with your thoughts, because thoughts are not commands. They are events. They appear. They pass. But you have been treating thoughts like instructions. I don't feel like it becomes, I shouldn't do it. I'm tired becomes, I will stop. I might fail becomes, I cannot start. That is not thinking. That is surrender disguised as reasoning. Stoicism teaches detachment from these internal events, not suppression, control, observation without obedience. And that changes everything, because once you stop obeying every thought, you regain authority over action, and action is where identity is built. So from this moment forward, the rule is simple. Thoughts are not decisions. Feelings are not instructions. Comfort is not a guide. Only principles are. And your principle is discipline. Not when it is easy, not when it feels good, but especially when it doesn't. Because that is where transformation actually happens. In resistance, in repetition, in silence, in unseen effort, not in announcements, not in validation, not in identity talk, but in execution that nobody claps for. That is the Stoic path. And it is not glamorous. It is not emotional. It is not socially rewarded in the beginning, but it is effective. And effectiveness is what changes lives. So now the final question is not philosophical anymore. It is practical. What will you do in the next hour that proves you are no longer negotiating with your potential? Because everything else has already been said. Now it must be lived. And now you're standing at the point where words stop being enough. Because everything you've read, everything you've felt, everything that tightened your awareness and exposed your habits was never meant to entertain you. It was meant to interrupt you. But interruption means nothing if you return to the same patterns afterward. So here is the final truth. Clean, direct, unavoidable. No more waiting for motivation. No more negotiating with comfort. No more living like time is unlimited when every day is already becoming memory. The life you keep imagining is not far away. It is not blocked. It is not delayed by fate. It is delayed by repetition of what you already know is not working. And deep down, you've known that for a long time. That silent awareness you feel when everything goes quiet, that is not guilt. That is direction. That is the part of you that still refuses to disappear into average living. And if that part is still alive in you, then this is your moment to stop consuming truth and start becoming it. Because one day, very soon, you will not be thinking about potential anymore. You will be living the result of how you responded to it. And there are only two outcomes. Either you will look back with respect for the version of you that finally acted, or you will look back with silence for the version of you that kept delaying it. So choose carefully what you reinforce after this moment. Because nothing changes from inspiration. Everything changes from decision. And decision always shows itself through action, not intention. Action. If this message hit something in you, not emotionally but honestly, then don't just let it pass. Subscribe not as a habit, but as a statement that you are done ignoring what you already know. Like the video if you recognize yourself in this process. Share it with someone who needs a wake-up call, not comfort. And comment, I'm done delaying, if you're choosing to stop negotiating with your potential starting today. And most importantly, don't stop here. On your screen right now, there's another video waiting for you. Go there next. Not for motivation, but for continuation. Because this is not about one moment of awareness. It is about the life you decide to build after it.